Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today I thought we'd have a chat about the difference between licensed drugs, off-license, unlicensed drugs, and off-label prescribing. And the reason for this is just it's fairly important because these are terms that get sometimes wrongly used interchangeably and they get bandied about, but not a lot of people understand exactly what they mean and the differences between them. When it comes to skincare, it's especially important because there's a lot of off-label and unlicensed prescribing, and it's useful to know why that is. So before we get started, if you're new to this channel, welcome, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. If you're a returning visitor, welcome back and thank you so much for your support. So let's dive in. What is the difference between a licensed and an unlicensed drug? Well, a licensed drug is one that has been approved by the regulator of that area. So usually different countries or regions have different regulators that basically say which medications are licensed or permitted to be used for which problems. And so what generally happens is if a drug has passed clinical trials and has passed the checks by the regulator, and regulators you might have heard of are like the FDA in America, the MHRA in the UK, and then there's the European healthcare regulator as well, a medical regulator as well. And these are examples, but every country or regional bloc has its own. And what happens is a drug gets put forward to human trials, and if it's passed the phase 3 clinical trial where it's been deemed safe and effective, then the license will be given normally for a specific drug, so in a specific formula. So that means it might be just the tablet form or just the solution or intravenously if it's an injectable drug. So that and usually a specific dose or range of doses. And for a specific kind of condition or conditions, and for a specific type of patient. So examples of this will be tretinoin is licensed for acne, and it's licensed for a range of doses, normally 0.025, 0.05, and 0.1%. And this is because it's been tested. Obviously you can imagine if you're applying for clinical trials and you're doing them, it's quite expensive, it's quite lengthy, and there is a limit. But the license only covers, and here's the important bit, that specific use and that specific form of the medication and that specific dosage. Another example is spironolactone, and I mentioned these two because we obviously use them a lot in skincare. So spironolactone is licensed as a tablet, but just for blood pressure. And so you can see where I'm going with this, and in specific doses for specific patients. And what the license says is, after extensive testing, this drug is safe and can be safely and effectively prescribed for these people. And the regulator has also identified the side effects that need to be disclosed for the patient, and the way that the treatment can be prescribed. And quite a few drugs, especially newer drugs, are under license in that way. That neatly takes us to off-label prescribing. So off-label prescribing is when you prescribe a drug for a different purpose that it's been licensed for, or a different dosage. So you know that the drug is safe for use for certain conditions, but there are other conditions, and these are generally also based, so it's not something that's usually just a hunch, for a doctor to prescribe something off-label, and they have the power, all doctors have the power to do that, if they are satisfied that there is evidence, scientific evidence, and there is clinical consensus that this drug has this value as an off-label drug, and that it's going to be safe and effective. And so even though there isn't a regulator that has approved it for that use case, from all of the studies that are published, from conferences, from clinical experience, and from just general use, we know that these drugs can also have this benefit. And so a huge number of medications fall under this. So for example, spironolactone for acne treatment or for hair loss, that is not licensed for those cases, but it is used off-label for these based on the research that is available. Something else is tretinoin for things like skin aging or hyperpigmentation. It's not licensed for that, it's just licensed for acne, but it is, we know from decades of clinical studies, it's useful for that as well. Other examples are things like dutasteride for hair loss, finasteride for female pattern hair loss. So these are all things that these drugs aren't licensed for, but from research and from publications and from kind of what's available in the medical community, they are used for this. The same was with ivermectin for rosacea initially as well. So there's a lot of medicine, and the vast majority of medicines in the world are like that. Another off-label use might be that the drug is licensed in another country for that use, but not in your country or your region. And so this is where that comes in. And then lastly, unlicensed. So unlicensed is generally a drug that hasn't been licensed in your country for any particular condition. And it may be that it's licensed in another country, or it is, there's plenty of kind of studies that have shown that it works, but it's just not being put up for licensing. And examples of this are a few things. One is compounded medications. So compounded medications by definition can't be licensed because they're individually made for each patient, and each combination is based on a prescription. And so, for example, you know, where things like minoxidil is licensed for hair loss and tretinoin is licensed for acne, if you combine the two in a hair loss solution, minoxidil and tretinoin, that is not licensed. Other examples are tretinoin and hydroquinone compounded together in a single treatment, that isn't licensed. When certain times, like combining tretinoin with a topical antibiotic or tretinoin with something like spironolactone, again, these combinations aren't licensed, even if there are studies based on them that are available, and even if they're widely used. The other thing is, if a treatment might be licensed in another country but not for anything at all in your country, that would still fall under that. Again, doctors can prescribe any of these in the UK and in the US, and I imagine also can prescribe any of these combinations, and the same with other prescribing health professionals such as nurse prescribers or pharmacists. They can prescribe any of these combinations as long as it falls within their clinical expertise, as long as they have evidence through, for example, the literature or general use guidance that it is effective and it is safe, and if they explain to the patient thoroughly the side effects and let them know whether something is licensed or not. So if you're using something compounded, let the patients know. If you're using something off license, you should let the patient know as well. Doesn't mean that unlicensed medications are not safe, absolutely not. So by definition, as a doctor, you're not allowed to prescribe things that you do not know to be safe. It just doesn't, all it means is just that specific drug hasn't been licensed and so has not gone through the regulatory approval, which is thorough, of course, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't been tested in other studies, or there isn't any evidence published about it. And the plus sides are that it also, the reason this whole thing exists is it allows a few things. So it allows doctors to prescribe treatments because the licensing process takes so long and it is incredibly expensive. Not every single drug, or most drugs, will not be put for licensing, especially if it's not going to make money. For a pharmaceutical company, no one's going to go through that effort. And so it means that there are a wider range of treatments that can be made available to patients that may not be if only licensed drugs were available. The same with compounding. The reason it exists is it allows for treatments to be personalized to patients. So for example, if we're talking skincare, it means, for example, with tretinoin, lower doses or half doses can be given rather than the set 3 doses that are usually used. For patients who need a combination of things together, you can kind of alleviate that burden of applying multiple creams or treatments by combining them together for ease of use. And also for outside of kind of dermatology uses. For example, patients who need oral medications but have difficulties with swallowing, you can create solutions that they can drink as a liquid instead of big tablets. Again, that would be an unlicensed use of a medication. So that's something that's useful. And in cases, for example, where there is no kind of treatment option available that's licensed or off-label for a patient, but there are studies, or in another country there is something that has been licensed that you think is going to be useful as the last resort. One other useful thing is compounding come in very useful in situations where there's massive drug shortages. So for example, like Ozempic and the huge shortage of that, many kind of governments, and though it's under patent, have allowed compounded versions of semaglutides to be made available to meet the demand, the health demand. So like I said, the whole point of all of these is that it allows, the aim is to allow greater patient choice and availability of medications that could be helpful. The important thing is that people should be informed and should know what the differences are. And as always, licensed, unlicensed, off-label, your doctor should always be very transparent about risks and side effects and allow you to make the best decisions for you. I'm going to leave it there. I've also going to leave a couple of articles that I've written that kind of explore both of these in more detail. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. If you like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Until next time, stay beautiful.